When Diddy was finally arrested by the Department of Homeland Security after nearly a year of increasingly disturbing lawsuits and allegations, no one was really shocked. If Diddy had ever been known for one thing, it was being unsettling. You didn't have to dig deep or even scratch the surface to sense that something wasn't right with him. There were whispers about inappropriate relationships with teenage stars like Justin Bieber and Usher, persistent rumors surrounding the mysterious deaths of Biggie and Tupac, and an undeniable craving for attention that often crossed the line into the bizarre. And then there were darker allegations, ones too explicit to even mention in the first 5 minutes of a YouTube video. The truth is, people had suspected for years that Diddy wasn't the generous, forward-thinking music mogul his PR team worked so hard to portray. Behind the flashy lifestyle and polished image was a man many believed had long since crossed ethical and possibly legal boundaries.
So I had two choices. Either I was gonna sit in that failure and give up, or I was gonna make a decision to step out of the darkness. You see, when you're in that darkness, you wanna sit there and wait for the light to come. The only way out is to step forward, to face your fears, to become your own light.
Despite the big donations to schools and his public-facing activism, there was always a darker undertone that even a billion-dollar fortune couldn't hide. You don't end up linked to accusations of murder and theft without a reason. Those kinds of rumors don't just come out of nowhere.
I'm a savage. Whatever I want, I'm going to get. Whatever I want, I have to get.
But it wasn't until his arrest, when the mask was finally torn off, that Diddy's true nature came into full view. He wasn't a good man with a dark side, or a complicated figure shaped by a troubled past. The moment the federal government charged him with sex trafficking, it became clear. Diddy wasn't misunderstood. He was deeply, unmistakably evil. The evidence laid it all bare, serving as the final puzzle piece in a disturbing picture. His entire music empire, it turned out, had been little more than a facade, covering up a lifetime of exploitation driven by his twisted obsessions.
And he knows better than to be talking about the things that he does with Big Brother Puff on national television.
At the same time, Diddy's arrest raised far more questions than it answered. No one was shocked. People already knew he wasn't a good guy, but now it's becoming clear that the truth runs much deeper and darker. With mounting allegations, it's starting to look like Diddy's crimes might rival those of Jeffrey Epstein or Harvey Weinstein. This wasn't just about one man. It appears he was the mastermind behind a criminal operation built on abuse, manipulation, and exploitation. That's why the questions are multiplying. How did he manage to hide this for so long? What exactly did he do, and how far did it go? Even more disturbing, who knew and said nothing? Out of all the celebrities and industry power players in his orbit, who was just silent, and who might have participated? The scope and scale of Diddy's alleged actions, combined with his influence over the entertainment industry, suggest a sprawling web of complicity and deception. This isn't about shadowy villains in the dark. This is about powerful people standing in the spotlight, cloaked in fame and glamour while hiding something horrific. And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, how is a person like this created? Who is Diddy really, and how did he become one of the most reviled public figures of our time? It starts on a bitter cold night in January 1972. Melvin Combs, a 33-year-old military veteran, sat quietly in his parked car along Central Park West, a stretch of road that today divides the lush greenery of the park from Manhattan's wealthy Upper West Side. But New York in 1972 was no glossy metropolis. The city was crumbling, unemployment was high, crime was surging, and entire neighborhoods were falling into disrepair. Melvin lived in Harlem, which had been hit especially hard. Once a proud and vibrant community, Harlem had descended into a bleak landscape of crime, addiction, and economic despair. Returning from the military, Melvin found few options. With benefits scarce and legitimate opportunities limited, he turned to dealing drugs, something he excelled at. Eventually, he even formed ties with infamous drug kingpin Frank Lucas, whose life later inspired a Hollywood film. But that January night, as Melvin sat in his car with the engine running, someone stepped out of the shadows and shot him dead. The killer was never found. In that era, most murder cases went unsolved, and whispers followed the killing. Years earlier, Melvin had been arrested on drug charges. Afterwards, several of his associates were also busted. Rumors spread that he had cut a deal and cooperated with law enforcement. If true, it may have made him a target, a man marked for betrayal. Nothing was ever proven, but one thing was certain. Melvin left behind more than just a criminal legacy. He had a wife, Janice, a school teacher and part-time model, and 2 children, a 1-year-old daughter named Keisha and a 3-year-old son named Sean. That little boy, Sean, would grow up to become Sean Diddy Combs. After Melvin's death, Janice knew how much harder her life had just become. She was determined to raise her children with love and discipline and to shield Sean from the streets that had taken his father. She refused to tell him the truth. For nearly 2 decades, Sean believed his father had died in a car accident, never knowing the real story until much later. Janice eventually made the difficult and expensive decision to move the family out of Harlem to Mount Vernon. It wasn't a dramatic improvement, but it was a new beginning. Still, life was anything but easy. As a single mother, Janice worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Often she couldn't watch the kids herself, so she sent them to stay with her sister in the Patterson houses in the South Bronx. Ironically, it was in the very kind of environment she had tried to escape that young Sean formed his worldview. Being a child in the South Bronx in the late 1970s meant growing up in one of the most neglected, poverty-stricken neighborhoods in America. The area was in such dire condition that even the President of the United States visited to witness the devastation firsthand. Diddy would later say that this harsh upbringing was the spark behind his drive, the hunger that shaped his ambition. But ambition alone doesn't explain what he became.
One day we woke up and there were 15 roaches on my face, and I was like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna be somebody. I'm gonna own something and be able to take care of my family. I don't want to live in these conditions anymore.
And while that particular quote turned into more of a meme than anything, with Diddy only telling it once he had become a billionaire many years later, it's not unbelievable considering what the Bronx was really like at the time. He also said this:
It just kind of snapped on me. Don't take less in life and always fight back. To this day, whenever I get too comfortable, I remember the roaches. I remember living in a situation where babies weren't changed for 2 or 3 days and everything smelled and there was no food. That memory is what really fuels me to make sure that one day none of us have to live like that.
Luckily for Sean Combs, as he grew up in the gritty, decaying streets of New York, the biggest deciding factor in the direction of his life was his mom's dedication to raising him. Right. Janice Combs raised her kids Catholic, getting them involved in the local community and putting them on the track towards education and discipline, making sure that Sean stayed away from the choices and lifestyle that killed his dad. They regularly went to church, and Sean even worked as an altar boy when he was a kid. Janice was even able to get Sean into a private school, Mount St. Michael Academy, an all-boys Catholic institution in Mount Vernon, with numerous educational awards to its name. But despite her best intentions to protect her son from the evils of the drug trafficking and gang violence that killed her husband, there was an entirely different type of evil lurking beneath the surface at Shaw's school, the very same place his mother had sent him so he would be safe. Because in 1988, just 1 year after Diddy graduated from Mount St. Michael Academy, the principal and chaplain of the school were both indicted for, in a case prepared by the NYPD and the FBI, they determined that at least 3 14-year-old boys had been molested. Timothy Brady, the school's principal, was sentenced to prison, although he was never removed from his position in the Catholic Brotherhood that operated the school. And despite the overwhelming evidence against the school officials, with charges being brought by the literal FBI, only 1 student was willing to speak out publicly, and so no trial was ever held. The principal, Timothy Brady, later moved to Chicago and worked at a different Catholic school for boys over there. While there isn't a directly known link between the traumatic predatory events at Mount St. Michael Academy and Sean Combs himself castle abuse by Catholic priests, is a known widespread issue that casts a long shadow over the reputation of the church, even though studies and information are limited, with many Catholic brotherhoods refusing to grant transparency to outsiders. But we know from extensive research that there's a cycle of abuse, positive correlation between being a victim and later becoming a perpetrator. In many ways, our childhoods shape our adulthoods, and with Diddy attending a school that was later found to have abused Zuzu at the top of its leadership, and being an altar boy for many years, the monstrous, evil choices and behaviors that later defined his life could be a hint at a dark, unresolved trauma from his past, with countless stories coming out later about Diddy forcing young boys to unhairs in front of him, admitting to sleeping in bed with Usher, having a bizarre relationship with Justin Bieber lawsuits that allege Healy forced himself on men as a form of domination. There are even videos of him being physically intimate with Biggie Smalls. Not to mention the fact that people have been talking about this in radio interviews and podcasts for years. That behavior isn't Diddy being gay. That's a guy doing what he knows. Repeating what was done to him, that type of behavior, most often doesn't come out of nowhere. As soon as he finished high school, the Combs family was overjoyed, when Sean was accepted into Howard University as a business major. But still, being at university was never his top priority, and during his first year at Howard, he leveraged connections from back home to secure an unpaid internship at Uptown Records, a New York-based record label that at the time was one of the fastest growing in all of R&B and hip-hop. Around this time, Diddy, then going by the name Puffy, gained a reputation as a fiercely ambitious industry player. Willing to do whatever it took to advance his career, he had a natural talent for networking, and many of his opportunities arose from his ability to forge connections with influential people. Easily, his internship at Uptown Records, for instance, came through a friendship with a New York rapper he met at a party that he hosted as a teenager. He started commuting between Howard University in DC and Uptown Records in New York, so he could pursue both opportunities at the same time. He was tasked with helping develop the label's newly signed artists like Jodeci Father MC and Mary J. Blige. As an intern, his main responsibilities would be things like driving Mary J. Blige from her apartment to recording sessions in Manhattan or organizing events for artists on the label. But it was quickly discovered that he had far more useful talents than running a guest list or driving an artist to the studio. The company quickly realized that he had such an ear for production, trend-making, curation, and relationships that he became an essential part of their operations practically overnight. Because the first record that Diddy ever produced ended up being a massive hit, but he wasn't even meant to be the producer, originally intended to be produced by a professional. The producer never showed up to the studio, so Diddy sat down and made the record himself. That record ended up selling 2 million copies. And so within a year of working at Uptown, the label's founder, Andre Harrell, promoted Diddy to Director of Talent, one of the highest positions in the company, despite the fact he was barely 21 years old.